大家好，我是方迪哥，欢迎哦。台湾并没有很多的邦交国，只有几个国家承认台湾是一个国家。我想你一定知道原因的。最近台湾就断交了其中一个尼加拉瓜，因为他们说这是为了有更多的商业往来。我有一位在台湾住了10年，来自尼加拉瓜的朋友 George， 他在这边有组成的家庭，也在这边工作。我很想听听看他的想法，对这件事情的观点是如何。Hi George, welcome. I believe there are so many Nicaraguans here in Taiwan. Taiwan and Nicaragua used to be allies. So please tell us about Taiwan and Nicaragua relationship before the last decision.
Traditionally, in the past, in the 80s, as a matter of fact, Nicaragua had diplomatic relations with mainland China. And it was only until the government of the 1990s, the president in the 1990s, her name was Violeta Chamorro, she switched allegiance to Taiwan, and it had been that way for the last 30 plus years. It was only until this past week that the diplomatic alliance was switched back into mainland China, and coincidentally, the president who was in power during the 80s when Nicaragua was allied to mainland China happens to be the same president as we have today in Nicaragua. I'm not too familiar with how the situation was in the 80s. I was not born yet in that moment, but I can testify that for the last 31 years at least that Taiwan had held diplomatic alliances with Nicaragua. There were a lot of investment, infrastructure, a lot of programs, especially for higher education, like university, master's, doctorates.
And what is the reason you think for the last decision from Nicaragua?
In a short, summarized way, I would say it has to do with money. Of course, mainland China has a much thicker wallet than Taiwan does when it comes to international aid, and therefore, I don't want to say too much about it because it gets a little bit too political, but it has been a fact that in the last few years, especially during the presidency of Ms. Tsai Ing-wen, China has been more aggressive into trying to isolate Taiwan diplomatically as much as they can, and we're just the latest casualty, so to speak, of this situation.
And what are the pros and cons of the last decision, in your opinion?
Depends on where you see it. I mean, if we're talking specifically about Nicaragua's perspective, of course the pros are that there is very likely to be a higher amount invested in financial aid or international projects in Nicaragua, that's for sure. But the cons at the same time is there is no such thing as a free lunch, if you know what I mean.
And how do you think the relationship between Nicaragua and Taiwan will be in the near future?
Unfortunately, we are a country with limited resources and some developmental issues going, traditionally. And we normally dance to the beat of whoever is helping us, really. So it depends on what terms or what conditions China imposes on how we deal with Taiwan going forward in order for us to receive their aid. In modern politics, it's a bit of a tribal mentality. If you're not with us, you're against us. And neutrality is basically impossible in today's political environment. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens over the next few months or maybe even the next year or two.
And there are many Nicaraguans here in Taiwan. What do you think will happen to them?
It's still in discussion. There are a few universities that are providing some financial aid for the students that are left virtually without a scholarship, because most of the Nicaraguans that come to Taiwan for study are scholarship students provided by either the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Taiwan International Cooperation and Development Fund, also known as Taiwan ICDF. I myself was one of the ICDF scholarship recipients, and when there are no longer any diplomatic relations, normally those programs are cut immediately. In the past, I've seen other countries when they do cut ties, they consider where you are in your major. If you're almost done with your program, they'll kind of allow you to finish. If you just arrived, you're either given the option to be sent back home and start over basically, or in some cases we have seen also and I've heard that China has offered to continue their studies in China, so they would have to move to mainland China. Now, for the rest of the Nicaraguan population, expat population in Taiwan, what will happen to us basically nothing much, because we don't really depend on those scholarships or diplomatic relations to be in the country. But of course, that will mean that we, as a Nicaraguan community, no longer have diplomatic representation in Taiwan. Basically, there is no embassy, and any diplomatic errand you would have to do, you either have to go to mainland China or one of the SARs like Hong Kong, for example. And that obviously complicates things a little bit, especially with the current COVID situation. It's not as easy as just jumping on a plane and going to Hong Kong, for example, to do something with your embassy and then come back either the same day or the next day. Now you have to take a lot of time in preparation and quarantining back, especially when you come back to Taiwan. You have to do 2 or 3 weeks of quarantine. Those are expenses, and you really don't have any help there.
And the last question, you can answer this personally. How do you think Nicaraguans see or feel about Taiwan?
It's a very sad answer what I'm about to give you, and unfortunately I have to be very blunt. And the fact is that not many people are too familiar and too knowledgeable about Taiwan. As a matter of fact, a lot of people in Nicaragua think that Taiwan is not where it's located. A lot of people even think that Taiwan and Thailand are something along the same lines. They're finding out about Taiwan because of this switch, because of this. The information received or provided by the government in Nicaragua might be skewed in favor of mainland China. Perhaps the information provided to the Nicaraguan people by the Nicaraguan government will be catered to what China wants Nicaragua to think the diplomatic situation is, and perhaps it might not be the historical truth and accurate recount of what happened.
Thanks a lot, Joy, for your valuable time and opinions. That just gave us another perspective about the issue, and we can understand better thanks to your comments. Thanks a lot for joining. Well, as we heard, governments and the people are different, and their opinions might be different too. Thanks everyone for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe and like. I will see you next time. Bye bye.